Welcome to People and Profit. How has France's economy weathered the COVID-19 storm? The government pumped hundreds of billions of euros into support for workers and businesses since March of last year. That's won praise from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development in its latest report. But the OECD is also warning of risks from debt and high public spending. Well, to discuss this and other issues, I'm joined by the Secretary-General of the OECD, Mathias Cormann. Mathias Cormann, thank you very much for being with us. Your forecast for the French economy is for strong growth this year and next year and gradually falling unemployment. How do you assess the French government's response to the pandemic in an international context?
France was hit hard, as countries around the world were hit hard by the pandemic, but the contraction in France at 8% in 2020 was a bit above the contraction on average across the euro area, but the recovery has also been very strong. So we see a recovery in 2021 of 6.8%, 4.2% in 2022. So this year that'll be slightly stronger than the Eurozone average. And look, the French government has responded very strongly, very quickly, and very effectively, it must be said. The level of support into the economy was significant, and their health response was very effective. The rate of vaccination is one of the highest across the OECD, and that has facilitated an opening of the economy and an economic recovery that we're seeing here today.
But we are now seeing another rise in COVID-19 cases in France as across much of Europe. How big a threat is that now to the economic recovery?
There are still downside risks to the recovery. There's no question there. At this stage in France, while there are signs of elevated, infection rates, it's not quite yet at the same level as what we're seeing in some of the neighbouring countries. So let's see how that plays out. But there's no question. There are downside risks to our outlook. A new new elevated rate of infections is one. Further increases or more sustained increases in inflation is another, but there are also some upside opportunities. For example, consumption levels could continue to surprise on the upside.
You've noted the problems of labour shortages affecting businesses here in France. Although unemployment is set to come down, it's still very high for a developed country. What should the French government be doing to help bring down unemployment at this stage?
There's a mismatch between skills required in the economy and skills available. And so while there is a comparatively high unemployment rate and a comparatively low rate of employment compared to other countries across Europe and across the OECD, there is a real training and skills development task to ensure that the skills available across the labour market better align with the skills that are required.
The OECD says that pension reforms need to go ahead in France. It's been a very controversial topic here. You're a former politician. Do you think that politicians in France should be going ahead with that ahead of an election next year?
We're sort of, just gone through a 1 in a 100 year pandemic and a crisis, and we're still, the crisis is not behind us. I think it's, best for elected governments to make judgments on when best to pursue important reforms. But, it is certainly true that the OECD has consistently recommended reform of the pension system here in France. When the government made various proposals in 2019, we welcomed them. We continue to encourage a lifting of the effective pension age to take into account the increases in life expectancy, but also reforms to ensure that older workers are better supported through the transition in new forms of work through appropriate skills development, but also appropriate incentives to business to hire older workers.
You've a couple of concerns noted in this report about debt and public spending. The deficit you're predicting next year to remain as high as 5%. Debt is going to be 115% of GDP. Is this the time to worry about issues like that?
Well, I mean, not in the not in the short term. I mean, there's certainly, I mean, there was, a clear need for very high crisis level expenditure, and there is, I mean, it would be too early to withdraw, sort of the fiscal support that is still being injected into the economy at this point. But there needs to be a longer term outlook. I mean, the truth is that spending levels in France were among the highest across the OECD before the crisis hit, we do believe that there is a need to have a medium to long-term outlook, that there needs to be a more multi-year approach to, I guess, the budget forecasting, the budget projections, and there needs to be a longer-term perspective and a longer-term projection when it comes to the debt outlook, something that other economies around the world already do, and we think that that would be sensible for France to have better visibility of the long-term debt trajectory in order to adjust over the medium to long-term that trajectory moving forward. I mean, a real problem that we see, it's not only that there are historically very high levels of expenditure, but we also have question marks around the quality of some of that spend. So there's a capacity to really focus on getting better bang for the buck by having a more rigorous approach to really insisting on better quality expenditure.
Given that we're heading into an election year then, is that the biggest economic issue you'd like to see discussed in the campaign?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, there's a whole range of things, no doubt, that will be discussed. I mean, we don't get ourselves into internal pre-electoral conversations of that nature. But I mean, what we would say in terms of economic reform focus, I mean, clearly this is a moment when significant investment is going into the economy. There's a $134 billion program investing into the strength and the quality of the recovery, and there's great opportunity to ensure that we really do have a successful green and digital transition. I mean, there's opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses in particular to be better equipped to participate and to benefit from the digital transformation. There is a real job to be done in terms of education and skills development, promoting better social mobility and equality of opportunity. In France today, still the future opportunities for kids is too linked to the family context and the broader social context, rather than, I guess, more objective merit. And there's a lot of reforms that could be pursued there to really get the best out of people and out of the economy.
How big a concern is inflation now for France?
Well, I mean, look, our assessment remains that, inflationary pressures are certainly there, and we need to remain vigilant and monitor them. But our assessment remains at this point that those inflationary pressures will be temporary. I mean, there are clear reasons for them. We've got, those supply challenges, and the mismatch between supply that's been lagging to catch up with a significant rebound in demand, and of course combined with an energy crisis and significantly increase in elevated energy prices. We do believe that both those pressures will fade, but nevertheless, I mean, it is something that we need to continue to monitor and be vigilant, in order to ensure that that is indeed what happens.
I'd like to turn to another big issue the OECD has been working on. You now have 137 countries signed up to this overhaul of the rules on how big multinational companies are taxed. It'll see, on one hand, profits redistributed for tax purposes to places where companies are making money, and on the other hand, set a minimum international corporate tax rate of 15% for those big companies. Where is this process now? Is there anything left to be negotiated on that front?
Well, so at the G20 Leaders Summit in Rome at the end of October, a formal agreement was, reached at that G20 level. I mean, which is very significant because you've got a broad diversity of countries, of course, there from around the world, representing all sorts of different perspectives that have signed on. And indeed, 137 countries around the world are part of this formal agreement. Now, what we need to do in order to ensure that there can be effective implementation from 2023 onwards is for the redistribution of profits or the reallocation of taxing rights to market jurisdictions. That will require an international convention. We are currently in the process of drafting that with a view of having that ready by the end of the first quarter 2022 with the signature sometime thereafter. And then in relation to the minimum global corporate tax rate, I mean, that will require domestic legislation, and we are about to finalize model legislation which we will be making available to countries around the world to be able to implement that in their domestic jurisdictions. And yeah, that we hope that should be available by the end of this month, and again with an effective implementation time of 2023.
This deal has been a very long time coming. Do you believe it was the best deal possible? Could enough, or could more rather, have been done for example, developing countries in this?
Well, this is a good deal for developing countries. I mean, developing countries were part of the discussion, were part of the negotiations. There are key features that very much respond to the needs and aspirations of developing countries. I mean, this is a deal that removes the incentives, for example, for businesses to shift their profits out of developing countries into other economies, or indeed it removes the incentive for businesses to put pressure on developing countries to offer lower tax rates in order to attract investment. I mean, because in the end there is this 15% minimum corporate tax rate, which will generate about $150 billion worth of additional revenue annually around the world, including a significant proportion for developing economies. Now, people will have a view, and people will express opinions that we should have done this, that, or whatever. What I say is that 100% of nothing, well, 80% of something is better than 100% of nothing. I mean, it is the best deal that we were able to reach agreement on with 137 countries around the world, bringing countries from all around the world around the same table.
Okay, Mathias Cormann, Secretary-General of the OECD, thank you very much for speaking to us. Well, that's it from us for now, but you can watch back this and all of our previous shows on the France 24 website. Plus, we're on social media if you'd like to get in touch with any comments or questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.